number one, you certainly want to have an emergency fund, right? Because if something breaks, and it's not a matter of if something breaks or if you have an emergency or if something goes wrong, it's a matter of when.
Welcome to Financial Freestyle here on Yahoo Finance. I'm your host, Ross Smack. Now listen, guys, no matter where you are in your financial journey, you can never stop learning. And that's why each and every week I'm talking to some GOATs in their respective field. And today is no different, as I'm talking to the Scott Ford, President of Wealth Management of U.S. Bank. My guy, Scott, how you doing, bro?
I'm doing well, man. How are you? It's good to see you again, my friend.
Man, it's an honor to have you here, man. I got the privilege, everybody, to meet Scott this past summer. He came to Chicago and spoke at the Maconomics Wealth Summit, and the brother got sharp game, full of knowledge, full of gems. So, man, it's an honor to have you here. Scott, I'm gonna just go right in because you guys, US Bank, just released a survey, and the findings are that, most Americans feel pretty hopeless when it comes to their personal finances. And in fact, I got a couple numbers, right? It says 81% say it's harder to retire now than it was for their parents. 63% say that they actually might have to come out of retirement. They're worried about that due to economic factors. And so my question to you is that, what action should people be taking to actually reclaim their financial confidence?
Yeah, Ross, I mean, it's a great question. So just by way of background and context, US Bank Wealth, we do a survey every year in the fall, just trying to get a pulse of, what's on the mind of investors. And this year's survey was entitled "A Crisis of Confidence," and how people feel that there are forces outside of their control that really are impacting their ability to reach their financial goals. Things like the cost of housing, market volatility, the political environment. It's making it much harder for Americans to feel secure in terms of making any financial decisions. And I think the real data point that I share with your viewers is, even as Americans are saving and planning and investing, they feel this lack of control, which is kind of like this crisis in confidence, because so many things are impacting their finances that are factors outside of their control. So it was a nationally, representative sample of, 5,000 people. And so we feel it's a pretty good proxy as to how the general population is feeling.
And so what I find is so interesting is that most asset classes are trading at or near all-time highs, right? Gold, all time, crypto, all time, stock market, all time, right? Real estate valuations also pretty, all-time-esque. What's the disconnect, right? Like, help me understand, where's the disconnect? The economy versus, the overall stock market or asset market.
The economy isn't the market, right? Those are two different things. So the economy is largely driven by, in particular, the macroeconomic environment is driven by things like, and you've been reading a lot and hearing a lot about inflation, like the cost of housing, rent, the cost of food, the cost of gas to put in your car. All of those things are like macroeconomic factors. The economy is really a function of expectations, right, overall, of either companies or particular industries or sectors. And I think kind of like what we see now in terms of people's excitement, and where a lot of the emphasis is in the stock market right now is in particular in the tech sector. And as you pointed out, and, kind of like the digital asset classes, and those things are just, they're trading based on future expectations, right, of what's going to happen with those particular asset classes. But the economy is kind of like how people feel in the here and now, in terms of like, do I have enough to cover my rent? What's the cost of food and housing? And those kind of things. And I think that's what the survey is kind of speaking to. People do feel a lack of control over the stock market. In fact, 6 in 10 of the survey respondents said that they don't have any control over the stock market. I've been doing this for a while now, Ross, and the truth is you've never had any control over the stock market. But I think what's different is the way people consume information, and the velocity at which, kind of like all the information is coming at you. A significant portion of the population now gets, their news and information from platforms, right, such as this, whereas years ago, When I was getting started in the industry, you had to, open the financial press. It came out once a day. Stock prices were kind of like already stale by the time you got them. But now we live in this always on kind of news cycle. And I think that's what drives a lot of the anxiety because you've never really had any control over what the stock market does.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, right? We're in a different realm where everyone has their own publication, so to speak, digital or not, where anyone has the ability to have a community and talk about what's going on in the market. Just, earlier this week, we saw Beyond Meat, right? Effectively,
Mhm.
from call it a week ago, go from 50 cents all the way up to like $6, which is largely a function of kind of the Reddit community. But kind of just going back
Mhm.
because I got a real hot take, right? And I do understand there's a disconnect, right? I want to say that the wealthiest 10% of Americans own about 93% of the stock market. Some crazy number similar to that. So it's very understandable why there's a disconnect given, inflation and economic uncertainty and political backdrop, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a person, to your point, where a lot of people actually might get their advice from a gentleman by the name of Dave Ramsey. And in fact, he
Mhm.
put out an article where he was saying that Americans should consider pausing their 401k contributions due to all the rising financial pressures. Now, a person that's
Mhm.
in your seat, and I
Mhm.
don't know if this is a loaded question, but how do you even respond to something like that?
I just generally, and this is not a disparaging comment about Mr. Ramsey. I know he has a great following and he's probably really super well intentioned. I never recommend that people stop contributing to their retirement plan. And it's for a very good reason. The thing that kind of helps you prepare and plan and have enough money for retirement is really a function of not timing the markets, but time in the market. And all the academic studies point out the fact that the earlier you start, the better off that you're actually going to be, right? So you might not be able to contribute all that you want to contribute, but I would certainly recommend that you continue to contribute at least something and try to incrementally increase that like a little bit each year over time, because that time in the market is what's going to give you the compounding effect that's going to allow you to kind of have enough when you get to retirement. Because the fact of the matter is, one of the good things or one of the good outcomes of the lives we all live now is people are living longer. And if you're living longer, right, you're going to be retired much longer. One of the insights from the survey is a lot of folks don't think that they're going to be retired, right, all that long. But the fact of the matter is, and I'll use my mom as an example. My mom retired at 55. She was a school teacher, right? She's going to be 84 this year. She's been retired as long as she was working, right? So with the positive outcomes and things like, healthcare sciences and all those things, we're living longer. And subsequently, you're going to have, more savings, not less. Well, I can understand why someone might need to dial it back for a relatively short period of time. Like I wouldn't recommend people stop because in many instances, employers will match your contributions up to some percentage. So if you think about like if your company matches up to 3% or up to 4%, that's effectively doubling what you contributed. And that's money I certainly would not want to leave on the table for sure.
No, I actually 100% agree with you there, right? I think Dave Ramsey, to your point, he's well intentioned, and I think the caveat that he's missing is that it's not a one size fits all, and he makes a lot of assumptions when he gives advice. One of them being like everybody should be debt free, right? Where a lot of people are like, no, I actually love the idea of having a 3% mortgage. I'd rather not pay cash in that and actually use that difference that I could have paid in cash and actually invest that and actually make more return, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to do that. And so I'm of that camp. And in this same realm, if you tell a person, hey, you should actually pause, contributing to your 401k, now you have kind of the psychological aspect of, okay, when do I go back to
Go back
actually
in.
contributing? So now it's like, okay, now am I trying to time the market or am I trying to time the
Yeah.
economy? And I think to your point, like
Yeah.
he makes a lot of assumptions to say a person shouldn't be debt free. And I think he also needs to make that same assumption when he says, okay, when it comes to this, you also, the average person isn't going to know when to turn it back on, aka when to contribute. And so I think I wholeheartedly agree with you there. Going back, right, to when you were speaking to at the Maconomics Wealth Summit, once again, we're grateful to have you. You often emphasize, the idea of automating your savings and
Mhm.
helping a person kind of tackle their shame when it comes to money. And so, like, what's one of your simple automation strategies that our audience should take away?
Save a little, a lot. Right? Like if you are consistent in your behavior and you save even just a little bit consistently, that's better than not saving at all. So what I'll often recommend people do is like number one, you certainly want to have an emergency fund, right? Because if something breaks, and it's not a matter of if something breaks or if you have an emergency, if something goes wrong, it's a matter of when. And if you don't have any savings, then more often than not, you're going to have to, perhaps turn to high interest rate loans or credit cards. So number one, try to have an emergency savings. And the best way to kind of do that is, let's say, when you get paid and your direct deposit, hits your checking account, you can set up an automatic transfer that goes into your savings like every time you get paid or on whatever frequency you want to do it on a monthly basis. And what will happen, Ross, is eventually like you won't even think about that. It's automatic. It just happens. It goes into this other account, right? And you would be surprised at how quickly that balance can build right over time. So that's just a very, very simple tactical thing that I recommend that people do. And then also, don't have that account linked to like your debit card. Like make it where it's a little bit more difficult for you to get the money where you're not looking at it all the time because you want that savings to start to grow and accumulate over time.
I love it. We used to automatically paying bills. We should also be used to automating our
That's nice.
savings and paying our future self. We got to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to have more with my guy, Scott Ford, president of wealth management at US Bank. All right, guys, welcome back to Financial Freestyle. And we're talking to Scott Ford, who runs wealth management at US Bank. And I think it's important, right? Because you overseeing over $500 billion. And I think there's a lot of myths when it comes to what wealth management is. And I think that's what kind of keeps people having money anxiety. It's like, oh, I'm not rich. I shouldn't be doing this and doing that. Kind of, what are some of the things that you and US Bank are doing to help people kind of overcome those, financial traumas and actually start putting their best foot forward when it comes to building and attaining wealth and also transferring it?
Those individuals, number one, people think like you have to be rich to get financial advice. That is not true. No matter where you are in your financial journey, we have an appropriate level of support, tools, and resources to help you kind of either get started or build on where you already are, whether you're just starting out or whether you need the help of a full-fledged financial advisor team or whether you need private bank or ultra high net worth services. We can certainly help you with that. But one of the pieces of insights that was really salient upon me is the fact that those individuals who, number one, have a plan and or work with a financial advisor. So like you could go online and use some online tools and resources that allow you to kind of play around and run some what if scenarios. If I increase my savings, if I lowered my debt, all those kind of things. Or if you got that done through a full service financial advisor, those individuals are significantly more confident in their ability to achieve their financial goals and objectives. So I always encourage people, don't count yourself out. There is an appropriate level of help and support and advice given where you might be in your particular on your financial journey. So
Another thing that I'm seeing, right, especially kind of, and I'm curious kind of from your viewpoint, right? The traditional 60/40 portfolio isn't as attractive to younger investors anymore. I'm hearing a lot of people are, diversifying into other asset classes where they might actually want higher yield in or just higher returns in general. And so how are we seeing that evolve? And, kind of what are your clients actually wanting?
It varies by individual. And what I tell people is there is no one size, fits all approach. Like that 60-40, portfolio mix has been around for a very, very long time and it's kind of stood the test of time. But as you point out, there are new asset classes. There are many different asset classes. And it really is a function, Ross, of really two things. Number one, your time horizon, because generally speaking, the longer your time horizon, the more risk that you can take because you can ride out the volatility over time. And then number two is your risk tolerance, right? You could have two people at the same level of wealth, the same level income, but one person could be very aggressive and the other person could be very conservative. And neither of those options or outlooks is wrong, right? So it really boils down to the individual. And that's what we really try to do. We kind of engage clients in the best firms and advisors engage clients based on what it is they're trying to accomplish financially in terms of their goals and aspirations, and also what their risk tolerance is. And then that is going to really inform, what that asset allocation should look like. And again, that could be different for everybody.
I was hearing some stuff, where effectively Jamie Dimon was talking about kind of how he walked back a lot of his comments when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto as a whole. But he still kind of remains firm where he's like, look, it's not my opinion, it's what the clients want. And so I always find that interesting because he called, Bitcoin a pet rock back in the day. But at the end of the day, he's in the business of servicing his clients. And if your clients want crypto exposure, you have to find a way to get that. And so I'm just curious, especially kind of with so much noise when it comes to, back, like you say, back in the day, everybody read the same publication. But now
Mhm.
it's AI, it's quantum, it's crypto. And so like I want to get a sense and give the audience a sense of kind of like from that overall portfolio construction, like are there areas that you guys are fielding more inbound requests for?
Not believe it or not, not really. Like a lot of things have kind of like remained the same. And certainly something we're keeping an eye on. But I can tell you, we have not, been overrun with requests to kind of like add, digital currencies to client portfolios. Because for the most part, our clients have portfolios that are personalized. And to your point, all of us, within reason, because you're not going to let your clients kind of harm themselves, but if you continue to hear the same thing over and over again about a particular investment type or an asset class that your clients are asking for exposure for, too, then that's something we kind of pay attention to. But we have not heard a lot out of that. I think a lot of folks are kind of taking a bit of a wait and see attitude, especially people who have already accumulated a fair amount of wealth. But I think that you'll continue to see this dialogue happen over time in terms of exposure to some of these different asset classes. And the S&P 500, by the way, is just, it's already kind of has a significant weighting, right to technology, the technology sector. So, in that respect, they kind of already got some exposure if they have exposure to S&P 500, which many portfolios do. But as far as, hey, I think we should have, cryptocurrencies and an allocation of X in my portfolio. We're not hearing a lot of that yet.
What I find interesting is that in your seat, not only are you helping your clients build wealth, but I think one of the more important things is sustaining it, especially during market downturns, but also transferring it. Can we kind of talk about that, right? As a person, like, talk to, the parents now, right? How should I be thinking about sustaining and more importantly, setting my kids up?
It's interesting. The last year's survey was about having challenging conversations about money. And, one of the takeaways that survey kind of revealed for us is a lot of people, myself included, did not grow up talking about money with their parents around the dinner table and things like that, right? It was almost kind of like a taboo subject. The good news was that has changed, like double the number of people that didn't grow up talking about money now regularly talk about money with their kids. And I think that's important. I think it's important to start having that conversation and educating them and helping them to become financially literate. Because if you wait until something happens to you and they inherit some money or you transfer some money or they're adults now out in the world on their own, right? It's kind of like, too late. They're going to be trying to play catch up. And by the way, they'll probably make a lot of financial mistakes, which happen to many of us, and you learn through trial and error. Well, you can save them a lot of that pain and heartache by teaching them early on, at least the basics, of financial literacy. And it also helps because we do quite a bit of this in our high net worth and ultra high net worth, but I think it can be applied no matter where you are in the wealth spectrum. Talk to your kids about like what you have, because at some point they're going to be the stewards of the wealth that you generated. And if your plan is really to, transfer that wealth to the next generation, making sure they're prepared, early and well before they actually have to be responsible for it, to me is the right way to approach it.
What I understand about your field is not, let's see what the world is going to look like 5, 10 years down the line, right? And so what do you think about AI, and especially when it comes to wealth, wealth management as a whole? How can AI either help or, impact wealth management?
I've heard it put this way: in the short run, AI is probably, overhyped, but in the long run, I think it's underappreciated. And I think that I've already started using it in my day to day. We use Microsoft Copilot. I find it a significant enhancer of my productivity in terms of, writing the emails, drafting emails, putting together presentations, researching different topics. So I think it's going to increase and enhance productivity. And I think that, especially with the advent of agentic AI, where you kind of have these agents that you can use to do specific tasks. So think about things that are kind of either simple, but like repetitive, that you have to do all over again, or over and over again, where human beings' time and energy would be best spent on some other high value kind of activities. I think that we'll start to see a lot more of that. So today we're focused on kind of like, how do we use it to enhance productivity, which is lower our costs to serve our clients, and then use that capacity to spend more time, engage with our clients, and giving value added advice. So I think we're in the very early innings of this transformation, but I do believe that over time it is going to significantly change the way all companies function in terms of delivering goods and services.
Well, that's it for this episode. I just want to thank you, Scott, for coming on and obviously dropping major gems. So thank you for being here. And to the audience, make sure you like, subscribe, share this with your auntie and your cousins. And as always, you could go and ask Amazon, hey, Alexa, play that new Financial Freestyle. Until next week, y'all take care.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.